The house stood alone on top of a hill, far from the small town below, making people wary to approach. Since its construction in the late 19th century, it had been filled with fear, its haunted legacy passed down through eerie stories. Before the Lutz family moved in, many claimed that the house had been the site of tragedies, where restless souls never found peace. In 1974, the Lutz family, Daniel, Claire, and their young daughter Lily, decided to move in, hoping for a fresh start. However, as they passed through the heavy wooden doors, little did they know what awaited them, a series of unexplainable events that would soon engulf their lives. The first night they stayed, the air was unnaturally cold, despite it being the height of summer. As Claire settled into bed, she noticed an unsettling creaking sound coming from the hallway. At first, she dismissed it as the old house settling, but the creaks grew louder, almost as though someone was walking down the corridor. Her heart raced as she called out for Daniel, but when he arrived, there was no one there. They checked every room, yet the eerie sounds continued to echo through the house long after they had gone to sleep. But it wasn't just the creaking, it was the feeling that something was watching them. The next day, Lily wandered into the garden to play, but came running back with wide eyes and a trembling voice. She said she had seen a woman standing in one of the windows on the second floor. The woman had long, dark hair, and her face was hidden behind a veil. When Lily tried to wave, the figure disappeared, as though it had melted into the shadows. At first, Daniel and Claire laughed it off, assuming it was a figment of Lily's imagination. But when Claire entered the room where the figure had supposedly been, she felt an unnatural chill that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The room had been perfectly still, with the curtains hanging motionless, yet it felt as though something or someone was there. Later that evening, while they were all gathered in the living room, a loud bang came from upstairs. It sounded as if something had fallen. When Daniel went to investigate, he found the hallway light flickering, but nothing was out of place. As he turned to leave, the light flickered once more and then went out completely. When he tried to turn it back on, the light bulb exploded, sending shards of glass raining down onto the floor. Claire had heard the explosion and rushed up to find Daniel standing in the dark, his face pale with fear. But the worst had yet to come. That night, as the family slept, Claire was woken by a soft voice calling her name. It was faint at first, but then it grew louder, almost as though someone was standing next to your bed. She looked around, her heart pounding, but there was no one there. When she turned to Daniel for reassurance, she found him asleep, unaware of the voices that had filled the room. Shaking, Claire decided to investigate. She tiptoed down the hallway, but as she passed the staircase, she froze. From the corner of her eye, she saw a dark figure standing up the top of the stairs. It was a tall man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, his face hidden in shadow. Before she could scream, the figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Later that evening, Lily, trembling, confessed to seeing the same figure standing at the foot of her bed. The girl described him as having an old-fashioned hat and a long coat, standing completely still, as though he was waiting for something. But there was one disturbing detail. Lily said she could hear his breathing, deep and slow, like the sound of someone suffering. She had tried to speak to him, but no words came out. All she could do was stare as the figure remained motionless, watching her. As the days passed, the Lutz family grew increasingly unsettled. Strange occurrences continued. Doors that would suddenly slam shut, cold drafts in rooms that had no windows, and faint whispers in the walls. Even more unsettling were the noises that came from the attic. Every night, they would hear what sounded like footsteps shuffling above them, but when Daniel went up to investigate, he found nothing. The attic door, once firmly shut, was now ajar, and each time he closed it, it would open again on its own. One evening, as Claire prepared dinner in the kitchen, the sink faucet turned on by itself. Water spilled out onto the floor, despite her being sure she had turned it off. As she wiped up the mess, she saw something even more disturbing. The water in the sink was swirling, as if it had a life of its own. She backed away, horrified, but as she turned to leave, she saw a reflection in the window, a woman standing behind her, her face twisted in anguish. Claire spun around, but there was no one there. The house seemed to breathe with a life of its own, and the Lutz family couldn't escape the feeling that it was alive, aware of their every movement. The more they tried to ignore the strange happenings, the stronger the forces in the house became. At night, when they would try to sleep, the walls would shake, and the house would groan as if it were alive, holding them captive. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was a living, breathing entity, one that didn't want them to leave. These strange events continued to escalate as the family became more isolated and desperate to understand what was happening. They began researching the history of the house, digging deeper into the past, and it was then that they uncovered something terrifying. The house had been built upon an old burial ground, and its previous owners had all mysteriously disappeared under violent circumstances. What they were dealing with wasn't just a haunted house, it was a place where the living and the dead were not separate, but bound together in a horrifying dance of death, resurrection, and eternal torment. And so, the Lutz family realized they had to confront the horrors within the house before they became its next victims. With these added horrifying and chilling details, the tension builds in the story, creating an atmosphere of unease and anticipation. The Lutz family, unwittingly trapped in a house that seems alive with dark energy, faces escalating dangers that threaten their very sanity and lives. Things took a darker turn when Daniel discovered that the house had once been the site of a horrific massacre. Before it was built, the land had been home to a small village, where the villagers were slaughtered by invading soldiers. The souls of the innocent victims, killed in a brutal purge, remained trapped in the house, unable to rest. However, even more frightening was Daniel's discovery that the house did not merely hold the spirits of the old village, but was also a prison for a dark entity, a supernatural force capable of controlling other spirits. This entity was the soul of a woman named Eliza, who had died during a dark ritual and was now trapped within the house. Other souls, drawn into Eliza's vortex, were unable to escape. One day, while continuing his search, Daniel found a journal written by Eleanor, a woman who had once lived in the house. The journal contained chilling entries about Eliza's presence and the strange events that had plagued the house over the years. Eleanor wrote, "Eliza is no ordinary spirit. She possesses the power to control others, and this house is the prison that holds them all." As time passed, the strange occurrences became more intense. Eerie sounds, shadowy figures, and an overwhelming cold presence haunted the house, leaving the family feeling threatened. Lily continued talking to Emily, but now the girls sensed that Emily no longer seemed friendly. Emily began to warn Lily of an impending danger. One night, as the family slept, Lily began to speak in her sleep, uttering strange words about a locked door and spirits drawing closer. Daniel decided to continue investigating the house. During one exploration of the basement, he found a cracked wooden panel, and when he opened it, he discovered a hidden room filled with strange paintings, ancient books, and a large mirror. As he gazed into the mirror, he saw not his own reflection, but a massive shadow advancing toward him. The chilling sensation made him quickly flee the room, but when he turned around, the door was locked, as if the house didn't want him to escape. From the entries in Eleanor's journal, Daniel realized that Eliza, more than just a cursed spirit, had created this very world. She had used the house as a portal to exchange souls with a dark entity. Eliza had begun stealing the souls of everyone in the village and trapping them in the house. Things became more urgent. Daniel and Claire decided to destroy the strange mirror in the hidden room, knowing it was the barrier between them and freedom. However, just as they were about to do so, Eliza appeared before them, taking the form of a beautiful woman, her eyes filled with hatred and sorrow. She laughed coldly and said, "This house is mine. You cannot escape." In a moment of life and death, Lily, with her special ability, stood up and used her spiritual strength to communicate with the spirits trapped in the house. With Emily's help, she convinced the good spirits to unite and fight back against Eliza. The trapped souls began to rise, joining the battle. And then, in the most terrifying twist, something unexpected happened. One of the souls that had been trapped for decades, a young man named Thomas, who had been the village's healer, suddenly reappeared before Daniel and Claire. His form was transparent, yet solid, like a ghost on the brink of becoming real again. His eyes were filled with sorrow and regret as he reached out to them, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and hope. "I never meant to be trapped here," Thomas whispered. "Eliza, she used me to anchor the spirits to this house. I didn't know I was helping her. Now, I'm bound to this place forever." This sudden reappearance was a shock, but it wasn't a simple act of revival. Thomas was a spirit that had, for reasons unknown, been revived by the dark energy in the house. The ritual that had once trapped him now began to break, and his form flickered like a candle's flame caught in a breeze. He wasn't just a ghost, but a living soul, resurrected by Eliza's dark magic. As the ritual of resurrection unfolded, Thomas's human form began to solidify, his features becoming clearer, more defined. He was alive again, not in body, but in spirit. His soul had returned to life after being suppressed for so long, and his reawakening shook the very foundation of the house. The balance between the living and the dead was disrupted, and the spirits that had been trapped here for centuries stirred in unrest. Eliza's control over the house began to weaken, but she refused to relinquish her hold on the place. She had created the house as her domain, and now, even as Thomas fought to break free, she lashed out with even greater ferocity. The battle for control over the house and its trapped souls escalated into an intense clash between the living, the dead, and the dark magic that had kept them bound. As Thomas's life force surged, he began to struggle against the dark forces that Eliza wielded. For the first time in years, the spirits within the house started to break free from her grasp, using their newfound power to fight back. It was a final, desperate fight between light and darkness, between those who had been wronged and those who had caused the wrongs. After the house shattered, the Lutz family left, leaving behind the painful memories. They knew that the house was no more and that the souls had been freed. However, the hauntings of the past, the ghosts, and the dark forces would always follow them. The haunted house was no more, but its memories would never fade. The Lutz family finally found peace, but the story of that lost house would remain with them forever, a chilling, haunting tale that they would never forget. This story is not just about a battle between humans and dark forces, but also a cautionary tale about the secrets that the past can hide, waiting for the moment when we least expect it, only to come back with vengeance.